So here we are after 10 long years, the conclusion of this long-running saga within the Destiny universe. Destiny 2 is a series that's defined the looter shooter and, more importantly, the looter shooter within a live service model. It is a video game that has experienced numerous highs and lows throughout its 10-year lifecycle, and the numerous lows would be dubbed every time the end of Destiny. And numerous revivals and expansions would tell the tale of how Destiny changed everything. I feel that this is an important opener for this video because with the release of the final shape comes the closure to this 10-year running saga, which was originally envisioned to be the Destiny series lifespan. It is clear now 10 years later that Bungie has no intention of slowing down, and whilst the history of both Destiny and Destiny 2 has ebbed and flowed between highly acclaimed expansions and widely panned expansions, we are now at a point of respite, because many of these beloved expansions released to right the wrongs of something prior, and don't get me wrong, the final shape has had to do that too. However, where I feel the final shape differs is that it not only needed to correct the record on the shortcomings of Lightfall, but also close out the entirety of the Destiny story. The final shape delivers on all the questions and concerns one may have coming from Lightfall. It concludes this long-standing story of light versus darkness in a way that feels satisfying and further contextualizes and provides further meaning to a lot of the concepts that were touched on in prior expansions or seasonal content. It provides a story that feels personal and intimate with the established characters and concludes many character arcs in a way that feels meaningful, well, to me at least, as someone who has dropped by for many of the seasons over the years and come back yearly for each of the major expansions. There is much to discuss here, from the new subclass, location, and overall the activities, and I'm excited to get into all of these different aspects of the final shape. And the long story short is that I enjoyed the final shape, and I believe that it is definitely the best expansion that Bungie has released for this series to date. So let's get into my review for Destiny 2: The Final Shape. Now we'll talk about, first and foremost, the story for The Final Shape. It had huge shoes to fill, being the conclusion to a 10-year saga, and also being a follow-up to the lackluster storytelling of Lightfall. Bungie had been fighting an uphill battle for the past year and a half trying to right the wrongs of Lightfall's storytelling, while simultaneously trying to prepare us for the events of The Final Shape. And as someone who played Season of Defiance and got the rest of their seasonal lore from videos, I can understand where the events of The Final Shape kick off and feel like narratively they did an okay job getting us there. But now the big question is, so how is the Final Shape campaign? Well, I believe that it is undoubtedly the best narrative that Destiny has ever experienced. The Final Shape delivers a personal story that plays on the emotions and desires of many of the different key characters who Bungie have been carefully fleshing out over the past few years through both main campaigns and more evidently through its seasonal content. It tells a much more intimate story through the environment of the Pale Heart, which is both a single player instance and an environment that is constructed of the memories of those who passed through it. This means that it will tell the story of that 10-year journey, and throughout your first playthrough it is a very isolated experience. You won't see other Guardians running around in a social space or anything of that nature. It's just you alone wandering through the remnants of this 10-year journey. But through this bleak battle of attrition, there is Guardians that face forward and confront the Witness, those being your fire team and your other key story members. The return of Cade 6 is one that everyone is aware of, but also you get a lot more heartfelt moments here with characters like Zavala and Ikora too, and you get to see things come to a conclusion in a really satisfying way, especially for a lot of characters that have been introduced over the years, like Crow and many others. The fact that this zone is a single instance instead of an open patrol is a really great idea that they had, and it really does sell and capture this experience and make the storytelling feel a lot more personal and intimate, and really does create this atmosphere between the characters and their interactions in between missions and outside the missions when you have these different rest spots. There are many emotional beats here, and the way that Bungie have answered a good chunk of questions that they've laid out over the years, whilst leaving them some up to interpretation and leaving some unanswered for the future, I imagine. Most importantly, the Final Shape had a strong sense of theming, and it was in this expansion when I truly understood why the game was called Destiny. I mean, there's been things that have alluded to it over the years, but I feel like in this moment, in this expansion, it really does become a crystallizing moment as to what the true nature and meaning behind the name of the game really is. The final shape feels like a hard-hitting campaign that really does close out the light and dark saga of Destiny in a way that feels worthwhile and meaningful to those who have been following the series throughout this journey. One final note that I'll touch on as well is, this probably isn't the best entry spot if you are a newcomer to the series, as it is essentially like jumping in and watching Endgame without any prior knowledge. It is the last piece of the story, the conclusion, the one that wraps it all up, where the stakes are at their highest and the story has come to that cinematic moment where everything is on the line. So if you are a newcomer and you were wanting to get into this story, I would say that your best bet is starting off with the previous content and working your way towards it. But I would also say that with this story coming to a conclusion, maybe with just how the future of this series plays out, that might be the better jumping point to start for this game. Overall though, the final shape is truly a worthwhile experience, and one worth experiencing if you are willing to put the time in to just play through the rest of the games as a newcomer, or if you are a lapsed or returning player, this is definitely one that will pull on those nostalgia strings and heartstrings, but also tell a really memorable and meaningful story in of its own right. And I think that it really does set itself apart from the bar that we've set for Destiny storytelling. The new Prismatic subclass is an interesting addition to the Destiny experience, as it feels like whilst it is technically a new subclass, it plays more like a gateway between all of our subclasses, allowing a much more flexible approach to build crafting and speccing your playstyle. It allows you to mix and match the different components of the various available subclasses and allows you to select whichever abilities, melee attack or super ability pique your fancy. On top of that, however, the Prismatic class does come with its own abilities, but much like using a super, these abilities of the class need to be charged. It's such a clever class with how they've integrated this. Charging this bar requires 50% usage of light related damage and the other half requires 50% of darkness related damage. You'll need to be smart with your loadout, ensuring that you have a good combination of both light and dark damage to correctly play this class to the full effect. And what I mean by this is that it opens up a whole new realm of how you build and spec your character, what weapons that you equip, what type of supers, what type of melee or grenades that you use to build this damage bar as quick as possible so you can get off your prismatic abilities. And once you do achieve filling up that bar in the bottom left, which is pink, that will be the time that you can channel your prismatic abilities. And what this means is that you'll have reduced cooldown times for your grenades, melee, and you'll be able to even get your standard grenades back and you can use them in quick succession. It just feels like you can go all in and just have all your abilities ready to go. And yeah, it's a great little balance there, because you're playing a bit more defensive, trying to build this bar, and you can use a lot of your abilities to your full effect, and then you can proc your prismatic abilities, and it's like a mini super on top of the actual super that you get and that you can use as well. And speaking of prismatic and supers, you will acquire a prismatic super for this class, but that doesn't happen when you proc that ability. It's something that you equip much like any other super. I also feel like Bungie have found a much more solid approach to introducing this subclass as well, because prior expansions like Beyond Light and more recently Lightfall have one of the major big issues and complaints that plague those campaigns is just how woven into the story getting the subclass was. It feels like half of the campaign missions were focused around acquiring this class, and more on that than the substance of exploring that expansion's main threat or storyline. Fortunately, here in the final shape, the subclass feels complementary to the rewards that you'll get for each particular segment of a mission, or more for the side quests that you do. It is something that you will acquire through the story, but it isn't at the crux of the story. It isn't something that takes up the whole story and feels like it takes forever to just get. And one thing that I do like about it as well is, unlike Strand, it is something that you get early on in the experience and something that you can just play with throughout the campaign. It isn't something that gives you these little moments where you get to use it and then you no longer have it, meaning that you have to swap supers on the fly when the story wants you to play around with a particular new subclass. Once you have Prismatic, you've got it for the rest of the expansion and you can just play around with it to your heart's content. The other thing that I like about Prismatic is how it does delegate rewards and upgrades. As I mentioned before, they come in the form of chests, and they are given throughout the expansion and the story, as well as side quests. I prefer this method over grinding fragments and things of that nature to just unlock these abilities from a vendor. It feels a lot more meaningful, and it feels like it's tied to something meaningful when you are doing it. It's a great blueprint for what I hope Bungie continue to do when incorporating subclasses into future expansions. So now I'd like to touch on a few things here, such as the gear progression, the Pathfinder system, and quality of life features like Guardian ranks, and how all these systems function here at the point of the Final Shape's release. I'll also be tackling this through the lens of a solo player, because that is how I predominantly experience Destiny. So first and foremost, the gear progression feels like it follows the same methods and structures as it has in prior expansions, where you'll be playing through the story mostly on Legendary and getting gear that will put you and edge you towards the soft cap. Then after that, if you are wanting to be someone who is raid ready, you'll go off and do activities like nightfalls, raids, and things of that nature. There are activities to partake in the world, like with any expansion, also help edge you towards getting to that soft cap too. However, Bungie have introduced a new system here called the Pathfinder system, which is a set of challenges that reset weekly but revolve around completing a various amount of tasks that all interlock together like a triangle pyramid that lead towards a rewarding piece of gear. And these activities are primarily things that will take place in this new location, the Pale Heart, and they're designed and geared and tailored towards that location and having you complete particular tasks there. It's a nice way for solo players like myself to get some pinnacle gear and really get a number that goes over that soft level cap. And it'll also help interlock and get you into playing with other people, being at the correct and more specified levels for nightfalls and raids should you meet people that you need to play with. And I'll talk about this now because that leads me into the next component, which is that Bungie have introduced now, after so long, they have introduced a proper LFG system that is baked into the Destiny 2 experience. No longer will you need to access LFG through Bungie.net. There is now a system, and I know that Guided Games has been around, but that's been in beta since the release of Destiny 2, which was back in 2017. So here we are at a point where they are offering an LFG experience where you can jump into raids, nightfalls, and different activities and partake in them with various different Guardians. And it interlocks really well with your Guardian rank as well, and coincides with that voting system that they introduced with Lightfall. And this LFG system, granted, was something that they were wanting to roll out over the year that came with Lightfall, and here at the Final Shape, I'd like to report that it is in place in the game. So I think that it's a great way to have single player activities that can get people past that soft cap, and then having an LFG system that can introduce people to new guilds, clans, and get people in there to do and partake in more of this endgame activities. I think that these touch-ups really do make Destiny 2 feel overall like a much more pleasant and fun experience, and it doesn't feel like as a solo player you are completely gated from content like you used to. I mean, back in Destiny 1, I remember doing the raids back around the Vault of Glass and Crota's End, but the reason I got into that was because I had an activity like Prison of Elders where you actually can meet people and then you can talk to them and get into a group and do the raids. So all in all, I really do think that it is a great introduction to the game, in addition that really does help solo players or people that are in a small group find bigger clans or people to do more of these harder endgame activities with. And it's nice to have this system in place in the game, and then also have these more social features like commendations and Guardian ranks that are also loosely tied around them. In the Final Shape, you'll be exploring a new location inside the Traveler called the Pale Heart. And I touched on this earlier, but this zone operates a little differently to previous patrol zones in Destiny, focusing on a more individual Guardian experience, and the overall exploration of the Pale Heart may feel at times a little more linear. There's some open areas that you can explore, but it is mainly a zone that you are traversing through the campaign. It's a really interesting way they've gone about this because it feels like it works on two different levels. It works as a linear level that you traverse through each part of the campaign, but there are much wider areas that you are able to explore that really do flesh out the overall location when it comes to patrolling that zone later on in the experience. But throughout your playthrough, up until you finish the campaign, you will be traversing this place alone. And it really does make and create that experience that this place is very vacant and bleak, and that you are this lone guardian traversing this location. This all leads me to the activities that the Pale Heart also has in store for you as well. First and foremost, there is a new open area horde style objective called Overthrow, where you'll be in this particular area in the Pale Heart and you'll need to assist other Guardians once you finish the campaign in completing various objectives and filling 4 different tiers that'll then lead to a boss encounter in that particular area. It is something that will feel familiar, but it's this hybrid activity that really is interesting and does differentiate itself from prior activities and that are of a similar ilk. So it does provide this familiar sense of it's a horde activity, but it is a fun distraction that also is different in a number of different ways. Another thing that I think is really cool with the Pale Heart is there's a lot of like little mini puzzles that you'll find around, and it really does take me back to the days of exploring the Dreadnought in the Taken King. I overall think that this zone has been a pretty fun one to explore and has a really unique visual style that I think really brings this area to life and makes it one of my favorites, but I'll get into that more later. I think what goes hand in hand with making the Pale Heart such an interesting location is, well, the new enemy race. And I think it's weird to say, but it's very fitting for Destiny. But here we are after 10 long years, and we finally have a distinct new enemy race in this series. Crazy, right? But one thing that I think is completely a new and refreshing enemy with new designs and new mechanics is the race called the Dread, and I think that they are great. They are an interesting inclusion into the world of Destiny and serve as a great basis for what any future races that come to this series should entail, because each different enemy type has a different ability that would serve as some sort of crowd control that applies to pressure you, meaning that you need to be adaptive, moving and on the go, and you can't just get comfortable, sit back and pick off enemies. They will try to force you out of cover, or having flying enemies like the Grim that will reposition above you and pick you off if you don't move around. There's also mini bosses that are really fun as well and really are interesting, such as the Harbinger and the Tormentors that we saw back in Lightfall. There is tons of interesting things that bring this race and faction to life, and I'm really interested to see where Bungie takes these types of designs in future. It's great, and it really does keep all encounters, whether it's on Legendary Campaign, the Pale Heart, or any other side activity that falls under the Final Shape, feeling fun, challenging, and rewarding. Whilst I can understand to some degree the frustrations that it has taken too long to see something on this scale, I feel like it is a great blueprint for what we can see in the future, and I would love to see this become a trend and these types of enemies become more of something that Bungie incorporates in future expansions. And I really do feel like that is how I feel broadly speaking about the Final Shape, and it's something that resonates across this whole experience. Now, I'd like to discuss what I feel is the focal point of this review that I'm making. I've touched on my overall thoughts with the expansion and all the new inclusions, the quality of life features, and improvements in writing that have been made, but there is still one major lingering thing that plagues every Destiny expansion, and that is how does this expansion fix the ever-growing issue with welcoming back lapsed players and onboarding new ones? Well, it's still an issue, but one that I feel is in a much better spot than it was a year prior. There are now missions you can access from previous expansions to get a taste, but it doesn't offer up much of the key information to really fill you in on what transpired, and the past seasonal content is still inaccessible and not really able to be played. It's not in the game. You can't experience that story content anymore. The content that has been vaulted in the past remains vaulted, and the new light quests is still very middling in the way it onboards players and gets them indoctrinated into the world of Destiny. In all honesty though, the Final Shape is the end to a 10-year saga, and whilst I'd say this year isn't the best year to jump into Destiny as a newcomer, the next year going forward may be the best starting point, and given all the improvements that they've made to the internal systems of how Destiny operates with its LFG system, its commendations, and the way that it is improving its own content, it might be the best worthwhile time to start with a new saga beginning in the future. We hope, believe, think, more on that in a bit. But I think going forward into the future with what they have here with its foundations, it will be a great jumping on point for new players. Because it's sad to say this, but Destiny still hasn't figured out a way to really get its new players to experience its old content, mainly because its old content isn't in the game. They haven't figured out something like, I think of Final Fantasy XIV, you are able to play through the base game of A Realm Reborn, all its updates and sequential seasonal content, like little story updates that lead into the next expansion. Destiny has an equivalent of that, but it still isn't accessible in the game. And looking into the future, this seasonal content still will go away. We are still unsure as to what the future is for episodes and whether they will remain a permanent part of the Destiny universe after the final shape has run its course and we are onto the new expansion, but only time will really tell. And it still is something that I think lingers and really does keep people from experiencing the Destiny world. For lapsed players, you'll probably be jumping into the final shape, and given you've come into this 10-year saga and you've experienced any part of it from the experiences in Destiny 1 to jumping on board in Destiny 2 and experiencing a few of these campaigns, you'll have an idea of the core tenets of what makes the Destiny universe, the Guardians and things like that, and you'll be able to follow for the final shape. Next up, I want to talk about the visual and sound presentation, because Destiny is clocking over 7 years old as a game, and whilst its visuals may not look cutting edge in terms of fidelity, there is something that really must be said about the level of artistic style and commitment to a theme and the atmosphere that has really captivated here in many of their expansions, but more importantly in the final shape. It really does try to capture this weird, uniquely distinct interiors and exteriors that feel like they craft the different memories and halls of the past, but also they're so unnerving and outright unpredictable, seeing faces come out of the walls and seeing these things morph in these really weird shapes. It is truly a feat for Bungie's design team, and I feel like they've made something really incredible here with the presentation of the Pale Heart and many of these levels. There is just some interesting interiors, and the levels here feel outright unsettling and like some real surreal art. It's crazy. As for the soundtrack, it is fantastic, and as always when it comes to Bungie's titles, it has a variety of range, reoccurring motifs from moments that have been in this long-running saga, and additions that are as menacing as they are triumphant. But the soundtrack also comes with a bittersweet moment, receiving one of the last soundtracks from Bungie that involved Michael Salvatore, due to the layoffs that took place last year. On a more positive note though, the various cast of voice actors did an excellent role capturing the emotion of each scene and really selling the narrative of this experience. It was great seeing the return of Cayde 6, but doubly satisfying getting to hear Nathan Fillion reprise his role as the enigmatic Exo Hunter. The Witness as a villain really had a standout performance for me, being voiced by Brett Dalton, who did an exceptional job. Seriously, every time they tried to communicate with us, they'd steal the show, and man, the different forms of emotion. Whilst Savathun was a cunning villain, the Witness felt unpredictable in their goal, presence, and overall demeanor, which could just erratically shift time to time, and really was perfectly conveyed here through this performance. I'd like to bring this video to a close by saying that the final shape is an incredible feat for Bungie and Destiny, and whilst there have been many highs and lows over the course of this 10-year journey, it feels like a chance to start anew in terms of the many problems that have plagued Destiny over the years, from the new player experience becoming harder to break through and penetrate for new people, the inconsistent storytelling and absence of meaningful enemy variation. If the Witch Queen proved that Destiny can have an interesting villain and narrative to match, then the final shape is a showcase of what the main cast of heroes can equally do and how compelling that cast of characters can be. Prior to the release of the final shape, the future of Destiny seemed like an unknown. This would be the end of a saga, but would it be the beginning of a new one? And if so, when would that saga begin? Would it be within Destiny 2, or would we see the story continue in the long-awaited Destiny 3? Well, shortly after the release of the final shape, Bungie released a short video showcasing what to expect from the current episode and the future 2 that will follow, and then they topped the video off with a label for year 11 of Destiny labeled Frontiers. I think what this means for the series more or less is that we could be leaving our solar system and exploring the broader universe here. It is my personal belief that this is a great direction for the series, and as someone who has been playing this game since The Dark Below, which was close enough to release and wasn't really a great little expansion of itself, the game has really grown over the years and really evolved into something that is insane. And to think back in 2014 where Destiny was, and look at it now where it is today, there is many things that I think have improved drastically, and whilst there is still some areas and things that I long for that were a charm to the original Destiny or different parts of the game as it's evolved, I think that this direction in the future really does just show the capacity and potential that this series really has. And at the end of the day, it really is just a showcase as to the type of game that Destiny is at its core and why it's that looter shooter that really did define this type of genre and put it on the map over the past 10 years. Everyone said this game has been dead for so long, but yet so many people have logged on to play it year after year and keep coming back. This Frontiers expansion may be the opportunity to right the wrongs of many of those problems that have plagued this franchise for so long. It might be that opportunity for new players to jump in and get that onboarding experience and become another Guardian just like us. It may be an opportunity to keep building on this storytelling and deliver a narrative that is as hard hitting as the Final Shape, but from the get-go. It may be another opportunity to also flesh out and play around with some new concepts for different enemies that will exist in this universe. It is true that Back Against the Wall Bungie tells the best types of stories and releases the best type of expansions, and after the disaster that was Lightfall for many, despite it having a few ups, it was definitely a down. But the Final Shape really does show that when they put their minds to it, they can deliver a great expansion. And I think that the future, if they continue this pattern, really will be just an up for the series, and it'll continue to just be an uptrend in terms of quality, storytelling, and everything that we've experienced in this expansion alone. Whether that takes a year and a half to make, personally, I would be all for waiting a little longer to get a fully cooked experience. But that's just me, and I'm very optimistic on the future of Destiny, and I'm shocked because after seeing how things played out the year prior, I was kind of in a dire state, wondering, would this game recover? Would this game really come back from this? And I'm happy that it did. The future is looking bright, and as a Guardian, in the light we trust. So until next time, I hope you're all having a good one, and thanks for watching and getting this far. Take care, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.